everyone. It is week 10 of the Arkansas legislature and week 10 of our wrap up. It's Jenny and Hannah with 4AR people. We're glad you're here. So this week, I do have a little catchphrase for this week. I'm calling it own the libs and make them pay, which is kind of a theme that we have seen really the last few years here in Arkansas, but especially during this 94th General Assembly. And so these themes of like government overreach and expansion of government at the expense of Arkansans' personal freedom have really picked up steam lately. And we're going to talk through what went on at the legislature this week, but then also some of those themes and how they're kind of coming together and firming up this picture of really a difference in what the Sanders administration says they want to do and then what is actually happening in the state. So let's dive right in. So I want to talk to you guys about this bill that passed the Senate this week. It is House Bill 1307. It is this Go Woke, Go Broke bank bill that we told you about really at the beginning of session, but it finally made its way through the legislature. And this bill would prohibit Arkansas as a state from investing in financial institutions that have these progressive investment standards. We did a little background information, context building on this type of bill, which is kind of a carbon copy of a bill that was initially started in Texas in 2021, and then has been replicated, or 2020 rather, and has been replicated in other states like Kentucky and West Virginia, essentially as financial institutions become more progressive with their investment policy. There's been backlash by companies like oil and gas production, these fossil fuel companies that are losing money because large investment firms are no longer willing to purchase stock or build their portfolios with these companies in mind. And then this policy kind of started in Texas, where they are obviously really committed to fossil fuels and have a lot of those in the state, making them a lot of money. And they were able to kind of, twist lawmakers' arms there and get this policy passed in Texas. So go woke, go broke. We're going to punish you as a state if you say that you support these like leftist policies. And I just want to be clear that these financial institutions that Arkansas is trying to break up with are some of the largest in the world. It's not like these niche left-winged, boutique financial groups that are driving some kind of crazy left-winged policy with their financial investments. It's actually like the biggest firms in the entire world. And what they have done is they've realized that the trends in technology are green. Like they're going to invest in green energy because that's the way that, the country is going. That's the way the world is going. They're also going to adhere to certain kinds of standards. So environmental concerns, social concerns, governance concerns, or ESG, which is this new best practice for financial institutions. And so states like ours, where lawmakers are conservative and old and really push back on the progression of, social policies and the way society is changing, they have an issue with this and they want to make a statement. They want to make a political statement about states like ours that we should not be investing in these firms. And we kind of have two takes on this. And one is that it's really bad investment policy. It's bad banking. The go woke thing, go broke thing is actually a really bad use of our taxpayer dollars, which go into these public retirement accounts. So our investments in the state, they go to firefighters and police officers and teachers when they retire. And so, those folks pay into that as a pension, taxpayers pay into that. And that's what takes care of some of our most hardworking, dedicated public servants. And really, we should not be politicizing their retirement funds. That's not a good use of of what their retirement funds are, and not a good way to make a political statement. And, it's also just bad investment policy. Again, these institutions have moved this way for a reason. Consumerism is more progressive. People are more progressive because they are simply younger and more diverse. And that is the way the market is moving. And so this is really kind of the second point that we're going to make antithetical to conservative values of letting the market do what it needs to do, letting a market be laissez-faire, which is a part of what our free market economy is in America. It's the way that we're structured. Yes, we have regulations, but also, a conservative principle is that we should have fewer regulations on the market and let the market respond as it will. And that is the way investment has been moving. And in light of what's going on with banking and all of this stuff, kind of, corporations and institutions making bad investment policies lately, it doesn't have anything to do with these ESG standards, and rather it has a lot to do with risk and, institutions not really mitigating that risk. And we just feel like we need to call that to your attention because it's a big, big thing. And if you also hear in the news nationally that these ESG standards or these woke banking practices are what is causing kind of this financial disruption right now in the banking industry, that's incorrect. That's disinformation. So we want to correct that record here, and then also make you aware that this is just really a political statement. And unfortunately, the folks who are going to have to pay for it likely are public retirees when they retire. And that's sad. So we might be pulling out of these types of big investment firms and going to firms that will charge us more fees and higher interest rates, and will ultimately lose Arkansas money.
Yep. It's so funny. They're so quick to like turn on their own values when something else, like when someone else does not align with like other values that they hold, if that even makes sense. Some of the people arguing for this bill will get up for a different bill and say, this is government overreach. And I think this bill is clearly government overreach. Anyway, those are my thoughts. We have a lot of hypocrites in this day and age.
We do. And I think we talked about that some last week, and it continues on because it's a pattern, right? Like the motivation for running a lot of these policies, these like, ooh, own the libs, own the liberals, gotcha, crazy liberals. The result of that being your driving force for policy is that like you're gonna have a conflict of interest eventually, because you can't always just be trying to own the libs. Like it's gonna run out of substance pretty soon, and they've done all of that, and now they've run out of substance, and now it's really unfortunately affecting areas of our state where it's antithetical to what they say that their principles are. So
yeah,
wild times.
Yeah. Okay, what next?
Well, I mean, I think if we're going to talk about overreach, I think this is a good segue into talking about what happened with the library bill.
Fair. Yeah, so the library bill passed the House this week. Really upset about that. However, I do want to call out, we saw some library heroes over on the House side. Deanne Vaughn just, really took a step out there, I think, and spoke against what the majority of her caucus would have wanted her to. And I think that's really, really good on her. And, she made valid points again and again. This library bill is going to have negative impact, and it's going to negatively impact the people who really want to pass this bill. And what that means is, there's a huge chance that books like the Bible are going to get banned, because it just takes one or two people to go make that request with this bill in place. And, she did mention that there are some bits in the Bible that aren't necessarily good for all ages.
And I just also remind folks what this bill does. So it basically subjects public educators, so teachers and librarians, to criminal prosecution if they possess obscene material. And then there is if a parent or member of the public makes a complaint about this obscene material, there's a process by which these public employees, librarians, would be held accountable and then even prosecuted for possessing that obscene material. And so the debate not only has been on what is obscene and how are we defining that prurient, if you will. You might remember that term from the drag show bill. But that's kind of where this conversation has gone. And I'll let you keep going, Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. Sometimes I forget because we talk about, all these bills all the time. But anyway, that's what the bill does. Again, another attack on public educators here. And Deanne was very clear in her statements. We'll play a couple, like a minute or two of her testimony. But that was one of the things that she mentioned was, she's so tired of her party being the party that is constantly demonizing and demoralizing our public educators, because this bill doesn't address like state libraries. This bill only addresses school and local libraries. So yeah, I mean, another attack on education, another attack on LGBTQ plus community, another attack on CRT and Arkansans of color. I mean, this bill just like encompasses all of the bad things. It's time for a legislative rewind, and this was probably my favorite moment from week 10. Deanne Vaughn got up to speak against Senate Bill 81, and she was the only person to do so. Her speech is just over 9 minutes, so we won't share the whole thing, but here's a short clip. Enjoy.
I think we might have lost our way down here somewhat. Republicans are supposed to be about local control, and yet here we are again taking local control away from our counties and cities because of a few bad actors. Because of these few bad actors, we're willing to criminalize and harm librarians. Oh, and teachers. Because if you didn't realize, teachers that have these books, might have a book in their room, it would capture them also. When will we stop with the message that all teachers, all superintendents, and all librarians now are have all these agendas to hurt our children? Because I think that is far from the truth. I guess the next step is for us to tell parents that they can't buy phones for their children until they're 18. Because just in case you didn't know, they can search anything and everything on those things today. Do I think that is good? No, of course I don't. But we can't regulate everything in the lives of Arkansans. At some point, we have to stop with the government overreach. Of course, I do believe our children should be protected. And that is why selection policies are so important. And again, already required by law for schools. So I don't understand why schools are actually in this bill, because even the sponsor stood here and said that. And if you want to look that up, that's Act 1776.
And I just really appreciated what she had to say from the House floor, because, she didn't have to. She was the only person who spoke against it. And Representative Vaught is a Republican in a rural-ish area, and sits on House Education and has been very heavily involved in like the LEARNS implementation. And so she pushed back on this rhetoric against teachers and administrators during LEARNS, and she carried that through. And she made a point, as Hannah said, of saying like, I'm really tired of this. Like, I'm tired of us picking out these educators and saying they want to harm kids when clearly they don't. And that was a breath of fresh air, in my opinion, because like that has not been part of the conversation. Like, these teachers and librarians have been characterized as groomers and indoctrinators, which we know that they are not, and that the House body and Senate body themselves have admitted to. Representative Wooten asked the bill's sponsor, hey, have you had complaints from your constituents about obscene materials in the library? And the response was, no, we haven't. It's not happening, but we're going to make sure it doesn't happen. And so, she eventually said like, hey, this is unnecessary, burdensome legislation that is the government really over responding to something that's happening at a local level. So if there are these issues of obscene material happening in libraries, that school districts and communities and municipalities should be able to address these issues themselves. And we don't need this big state law full of red tape to just make it harder to live here.
Yeah. I mean, at one point she said, we've lost our way. And I think they have, like, all of this is national politics. It's being brought into our state. And we've heard on the floor, we've heard several members talk about culture war. This is about a culture war, a current culture war. That's not your job. And like, feeding into what could be a very damaging, what you're saying is damaging, a culture war that's damaging, whatever. Feeding into that does not help, and it doesn't stop. If anything,
that's a really good point. Like, the third job is to not write policy and pass laws. It's not to legislate culture.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, if you look at all of these bills, I think, at the beginning of session, whenever we started this round in 2023, Greg Letting, made the comment of, I want to make sure the bills that we're passing out improve lives and like are helping people, and I can actually visualize who these bills are going to help. But like none of these bills do that. Like you can't really see who it's going to help, or if you do, it's that one group of people, it's that one very small group, and then you look out and you see all the other people that are being hurt by it, and that's just not good governing at all.
Yeah. And like, I think this is something that we'll likely work on as session is nearing its end. I think we're expecting it to end sometime in mid to late-ish April. So a month or so from now that we have left. But next week we have off for spring break. So just, 4 or so-ish weeks left of this legislative session. And like, I think it would be really interesting visually to paint a picture of legislation that helps and legislation that harms, and to see those side by side and to see like which way is the scale going to tip. I think we kind of know which way it's going to tip.
Right.
But I think that might be striking to some people. Basically what you said a minute ago, Hannah, like, thanks for filling us in on what that bill does, because you and I are in it every day. Like, we're seeing this legislation come through, we're updating people. But when you see it all together, it becomes quite overwhelming visually to say, like, that's what they've been spending their time on. Like, that's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
What about all of these other things
Right.
that are going to go completely unaddressed? And then a lot of things that have been passed that we aren't talking about, but are pretty benign as far as policy goes. Like, they might solve a problem here or there about home inspections or plots of land or, whatever it is, these like small tweaks to our transportation policy or agriculture. But like, as far as like really being collaborative and creative at addressing issues that face a lot of Arkansans, we really have not seen much legislation that does that.
Yep. Well, we kind of mentioned culture war. I'm gonna just move right on into another bill that definitely falls into that. At one point, Bentley on this week got up to speak. I think it was during her closing for this particular bill. But she mentioned that, it was necessary because we are in a culture war. So the bill that I'm talking about, but this is the unborn children monument that's going to be placed at the Capitol. It's passed. I know we've talked about it. I don't know what else to say. It's really disappointing. I will give a shout out to Representative Unger, who was one of the few who got up to speak against the bill. Again, I think he said, like, it just doesn't feel right. Like, this is definitely overreach. And like, we are a serious body and our actions have serious consequences. And the consequences that he mentioned were actually that this monument might do more harm to the pro-life movement than it would do, than it would help. Is citing, the pro-choice movement is going to be pretty angry when they see that monument every day that they go to the Capitol. And I think that's a fair point. A couple other people got up and said, this is really petty. This is us just like rubbing it in people's faces that we won.
My partner calls it dancing in the end zone.
Yes. And so, another thing that's really egregious, which isn't super surprising by the people who were speaking for the bill, but Roe versus Wade was described or was compared to segregation, slavery, the Holocaust, and the Oklahoma City bombing was also thrown out there because we have monuments for that. They also compared it to wars. We have monuments for our soldiers who've fallen in battle. So, why not have this? But we have to remember it so that we don't repeat it, which I think is really ironic coming from the party that wants to ban CRT.
Yes. And who probably is not in favor of, like giving birth control out in high schools, and actually doing things that would decrease the likelihood of people needing abortions. I think this is a good segue into a not so great, not so good bill that was filed. So this bill has not been heard yet, but we want to bring it to your attention because it's like one of those very niche bills that solves like a very specific problem, but it is wrapped up in this big tortilla of culture war rhetoric. So HB 1615 was filed this week, and it basically it's kind of complicated in the sense that it allows private organizations and businesses and even individuals who have a religious belief or stance to discriminate against someone for a particular reason. But then if they are penalized for that discrimination for whatever reason, if they're penalized by the state, then they have a path forward to sue the state for damages. And so some background is that religious organizations and nonprofits can already discriminate based on religion. Like that is, they are exempt from that IRS standard of not discriminating. Like churches that don't believe that women should serve as pastors cannot hire women as pastors. So that's an example of that exemption, but they still retain their tax deductible status as a 501c3. So what this is saying, though, is that if a particular organization does that discrimination, but then there's some kind of retaliatory factor that something that happens as a result of that. And I was kind of racking my brain, like what is the state doing to churches that are discriminating? Well, nothing. Well, then if you dive into the meat of the bill, you can kind of start to put the puzzle pieces together. So it lays out all of this language about foster care and adoption. And so really what we think this bill is about are faith-based child care, child welfare organizations. So Christian organizations, probably, that help, placement for adoption or help with the foster care situation. Like there's one I know of that's really active in Northwest Arkansas called The Call, and they will recruit members from churches and get them kind of placed with kids in foster care systems. And their mission is very admirable. It's to reduce the number of kids in the foster care system. Well, to have these faith-based organizations doing child welfare in the state of Arkansas, you have to be accredited. You have to be licensed by the state. So there's a special application process that comes with that, rightfully so. The state needs to be making sure that we're not trafficking children, that we're not, involved in any kind of shady maneuver to, like also where I live a while ago, there was some bad actors who were, basically stealing Marshallese babies and placing them out for adoption, people in West Coast states. And it was this whole racket. And so, there needs to be regulatory measures taken to ensure these organizations comply. Well, with those state licensures comes the requirement that you do not discriminate. And so the example that we give and this piece that we wrote about and tweeted about is, say, for example, there is a gay couple who goes to a faith-based organization to either get placed with a foster care child or to adopt. And that group says, no, we are not going to provide you services because you do not align with our values of traditional family and only men marrying women. And so we are going to deny you. Well, this is saying if the state revokes that faith-based organization's accreditation, then that group can sue the state. And this is apparently a big deal because there's this thing called the state's sovereign immunity. It's a clause. I think it's part of the 11th Amendment of the Constitution. I'm not sure about that. But essentially, no one can just sue the state for whatever reason. I mean, could you imagine if that were actually allowed?
I would have gotten some money by now. You know what I mean? Like,
you would all be rich. Now you can't. Now, to be clear, you can sue the state if your constitutional rights are violated. So this bill is trying to make an argument saying, like, the religious beliefs of these privately held groups trump the state and public regulations of fairness and equity and non-discrimination. So it's making an argument saying the state is discriminating against people and individuals and groups for the religious beliefs. But really what it is, hey, we still want to be able to discriminate and we want to have our cake and eat it too. And you still need to give us our state accreditation and our permits and all of this stuff so that we can keep discriminating and you don't get to retaliate. And if you do retaliate, we're going to sue you. So it's very much like kind of flipping the discriminatory language on its head. And it's framed as like, this is a First Amendment bill, like these individuals have the right to discriminate and the state can't intervene. And like, all of that is true, but you don't get to do state approved business while discriminating against people for whatever reason it is.
right.
You want to have a cake shop and not sell your cake to the gay couple? Hey, you can do that. But if it's something that the state needs to license and you're providing a service to the public, you cannot discriminate against the public. And so that's why this bill is problematic. And also, again, I don't think that it will be successful in the sense that I don't think that there's a cause or an on-ramp to suing the state for something that's not a violation of constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those where it's like they don't distinguish, like in their heads, an individual's rights are the same as like a state funded institution. And that's obviously that's not true, or we wouldn't have passed LEARNs. So, you know, it's like, I don't know. I couldn't read that whole bill. I got it. I got to the portion where, you know, they were talking about traditional marriage and I was like, I can't. I can't. It's not worth my time. It's just like my time, but like my mental stability. I was just like, I can't read these words.
And this is, I just had this thought. I didn't say this in the piece that we put on for AR people about this, but because I just now thought of it. But it's also interesting too, because like this is it's like another maneuver that the legislature is taking to kind of dissuade the judicial branch for doing their job, or like basically like removing some of the judicial branch's power as a check and a balance to what the legislature does. And so again, it's like that continuation of like, we want to be the only ones, and like, we want to empower all of our people, which is just, you know, white, Christian, you know, like fill in the blank, and all of these other people, like they don't count. It's freedom and opportunity for this like one very traditional, you know, alignment, and then everyone else can just go like move to Michigan or Colorado.
Moving on, I just want to throw this out there. It's a bill that got pre-filed, I think, by Senator King. And he had two bills that were very similar. And the first one, you know, they're both dealing with criminalizing certain medical things, or like opening up that opportunity for someone to file a suit. But the first one had to do with opioids. I think that's a fair, you know, it's an issue in our state. And the whole goal is to be able to file suit against someone who knowingly provided something that was in the opioid world, knowingly provided something that was harmful or addictive. And then the other bill is about vaccines. And what this does, and it's specific to, so it's not like you can't sue your doctor or like the person who gave you the vaccine. This specifically has to do with like pharmaceutical companies. And so basically it gives you the right to sue a pharmaceutical company if they knowingly gave you or persuaded you to get a vaccine. And we all know what the elephant in the room is when it comes to this bill. But when it was being presented, King very specifically said, I don't want to get into that debate regarding vaccines and whether or not the COVID vaccine is harmful. But you know, I've received my vaccines and I'm fine. I think most people are fine. I think most people who got COVID are not fine at this point. Anyway, that bill passed, which I was actually, you know, I was kind of surprised about. Not really, but like kind of, because it's kind of pointless. The bill itself has like I think it's a 5 to 15 year, it'll basically go away. Like this bill, like the law, if it passed, it will dissolve if no one uses it, which is a weird thing that I've never heard of. Anyway, fun time. He mentioned that he's not a veterinarian, but he was a vet tech or something, or like did something for a few years. So he knows about vaccines, y'all. That was the whole point.
I wonder if he knows how to rope.
Right. I don't know. I will say I tweeted this particular interaction, and I made a mistake and said that, you know, he had worked as a veterinarian or like worked with, and he responded to our tweet, but was very professional and very kind about it. He said something, you know, I might have misspoke, but this is the correct information. So I'm glad he wasn't like a David Ray, you know, on Twitter. But anyway.
Speaking of David Ray, Representative David Ray, we'll kind of zoom over this part fairly quickly. So there was like a lot of bills that Representative Ray filed last week that were up in House committee this week. And Representative Ray, just some context for you, he is typically the legislator who is at the forefront of like pushing to either erode or limit or end direct democracy for the people of Arkansas. So in our Constitution in Arkansas, we have this guaranteed right as the people to place issues and initiatives on the ballot ourselves. And that requires a certain process, which is like you gather signatures from X amount of counties. Right now it's 15 per the Constitution. And it's a percentage of people who voted in the last election that you have to have. And then as long as your title is good and it's approved by the state, you get your issue on the ballot. And it's definitely a very big deal to go through that process. But this is also the way that Arkansans passed an increase in minimum wage. It's the way we passed medical marijuana. It's also the way we have shot down, you know, referred things through the legislature as those issues on the ballot. And so Representative Ray really doesn't like this direct democracy thing, and he wants to make it harder for Arkansans to be able to get issues on the ballot. This is very much a nonpartisan issue. We were part of a coalition 2 years ago to defeat an issue that would have made it harder, and we had strange bedfellows in our coalition. Americans for Prosperity being one who, from like an issue and a value standpoint, we are usually on the opposite end of the spectrum from them. But on this issue of direct democracy, this is bipartisan. There are people across the political spectrum that believe in this mechanism. It's one thing that actually makes our state really great, and really is another one of those levers to provide checks and balances on the legislature. So no wonder a lot of them want to get rid of it, because it's our way of being like, you don't know how to make good laws, so we're just going to do it ourselves.
Yeah, and I will say, it's at this point, like if you watch how our legislators treat people who come to testify, this is the only way that Arkansans have a voice. We've seen time and time again with all of these bills, we have, 20, 30 people signed up to speak against, maybe 5 to 10 on the other side, and we still are passing these bills. And so at the end of the day, if we want anything to get done or we want anyone to listen to us, this is it. Like, this is the only way that we can do that. And like you said, David Ray hates it. Like, all about that, power and control. We started that whole like power and control theme in 2021, and we're still seeing it. We're still there. And that, I mean, I don't see that going away anytime soon either, especially with people like David Ray. And I'm trying to think of others who want to erode it. Senator Blake Johnson was one too, who has some real bad takes about some of this stuff. So
it's just, we can just always expect this, I think, from Representative Ray, as long as he's in office. And so he filed this like batch of bills, like 7 or 8, I don't remember how many, and they all are referred to state agencies, which is the committee that does like election related, voting related things. And so one of them was House Bills, I believe it's 1601, and that would have required these canvassers. So when you want to get a ballot issue on the ballot, you've got to collect these signatures, and they passed a bunch of laws last session to like make that process even more difficult. So you have to pay your canvassers. They can't be criminals. There's all these things. Well, this would require them, in addition to all of the regulations that they already have, for canvassers to go through a application process and a training with the Secretary of State's office and then get a permit. Bear in mind, this process does not exist currently, but this bill had an emergency clause, which means that if it passed and was signed by the governor in April, let's say, that immediately that would go into effect. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State's office has no such thing in place to actually certify these now required certifications for people collecting signatures. And so it would have a broad impact immediately on this process, basically completely shutting it down to where no one could legally be able to gather signatures. And it's also in direct conflict with the Constitution, which is clear about saying that you can't really do anything to interfere with people who are gathering signatures for a ballot petition. And so we are thrilled because yesterday, very late in the afternoon, this bill did not pass in the House State Agencies Committee. So shout out to those folks who are doing God's work of protecting our constitutional democracy and our rights to direct democracy in the state. And similarly, there was like another strange bill in the Senate that was going down kind of at the same time that morning, that would put some restrictions on people who challenge ballot canvassers for signatures. So like if ballot signature people are getting harassed, like it would be illegal to harass them, which kind of makes sense, I think, already, like just from a legal standpoint. I don't think you're allowed to harass people for any reason. But there was some people that were whose initiative got defeated in Polk County last cycle, and I think they're still kind of sad and have hurt feelings about that. And so this legislation, I think, is an attempt to get retribution, maybe because their initiative didn't pass. But anyway, at least 1601 was defeated, and we're not going to have that one go to court because it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, and before we move on, I do want to shout out Nicole Clowney. I think she was a big part of why 1601 did not pass. And, she raised some good arguments. Obviously, it's unconstitutional. But the main thing she had an issue with, well, maybe not the main thing she had an issue with, but I think the main thing that probably got to most of the people in the committee over it being unconstitutional is that we didn't have any information as to what the application itself would look like. And the bill did not give any specifics as to what reason someone might be turned away other than like failing a criminal background check, which is already a part of the law. And so this moving forward, we don't know who's going to be Secretary of State at any given time. They have 4-year terms. I think this is Thurston's last term because I think it's a two term and done, if I'm not mistaken. If it's the same as the governor, I need a refresh on all of that. I should know. I ran a Secretary of State campaign, but whatever. So anyway, all of that being said, they might change the requirements for getting that certificate whenever they come into office. And so there's just no standard, who's to keep them from turning away someone who has a different religion or like who looks a little different or who identifies as trans. There really was no thought behind it.
Yeah. And did you want to mention, Hannah, the matter of unconstitutional bills being challenged in court, and that one is already
we already have one, not a few days after it was signed into law, I don't even think. But anyway, it's the bill that instead of doing a constitutional amendment, they decided to write it as a statute because they thought that they were cheating the system. So it's already in court, y'all. And we're just waiting for more. We're gonna have some more that have been passed that are gonna go to court. But anyway, this one definitely,
solidly unconstitutional.
Solidly. And they really think they're so smart with their strategy, but it's not gonna work.
Which is again with what is guiding them, what are these motivating factors, what is their foundation? It's not upholding the Constitution, which is an oath that they take. They swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that includes the Arkansas Constitution. These are these principles that are embedded in the identity of what it means to be Arkansan and what it means to govern a state of Arkansans. And direct democracy is one of them. And so these blatant attempts to erode that process, to really disenfranchise Arkansans from exercising their collective voice on the ballot, is so egregious. It's so appalling. It's been denied. The people have denied it over and over and over again. And yet they keep going because what they care about is power. They care about power. They care about control. And that is something that I know I could scream into the wind about until I'm blue in the face, is this is our state government in a nutshell. These are our leaders that go every day under the assumption that they are going to represent their people, their constituents, that they're going to solve problems, that they're going to help people, that they're going to do what's right. And when you realize that the only thing that keeps them going is ensuring their own power and control, and then shoring it up by adding more and more barriers to the system of checks and balances, I think people can start to feel pretty unsatisfied, I think is putting it nicely. But maybe really taken aback or appalled or whatever it is. And so even though we love this mechanism of direct democracy because it is the way that we can get a lot of these things done when our legislature lets us down, we need to stop sending people there who only care about their own power. That is a must.
You have to look past the smoke screen of this culture war, all of the stuff that they say that gets you fired up, whether for or the people that get fired up for them, and really look at what they're doing. Because
yes. If someone is talking about national politics, but they're running for local office, that is a red flag. That is a red flag. Yep. National politics has nothing to do with governing our state and crafting good policy that helps Arkansans. Nothing.
If they don't mention the fact that we are food insecure, the fact that kids are starving, the fact that our elderly are starving too, we're in the top 5 for that as well. If you're not mentioning those issues that you can directly map back to your constituents, you have no business running for office and on the local level. Like, run for Congress if you're going to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, Arkansans have the power. We just would tap into that. I do want to say that a few like positive things happened. There were some negative things that happened. Just to quickly update you, Hannah mentioned the anti-abortion memorial, which is just like bleh, so bad. That trans youth medical malpractice bill that we've talked to you about before has become law. And that's a biggie because, and we mentioned this at the beginning, that it really totally wipes out trans youth healthcare in the state, because it means that doctors who provide those procedures are not going to be able to get malpractice insurance, because insurance companies are not going to want to insure them for fear of being sued. And so they frame that bill through the culture war lens. They said, like, this is actually, we're protecting trans kids and giving them a path to sue. Trans kids could already sue. This just made strict liability. So if anybody had a complaint at any point in time, they could go back and say, I'm suing, and they'll get damages. And so these insurance companies said, bye, we're not providing insurance anymore. And another thing is this ID law that is now required to watch porn has also moved forward, and like just flagging this again, an antithetical principle to the conservative values of like privacy of your personal information. You're going to have to show a like digital identification to access this site. This is similar to the big anti-big tech bill that's going to require children to show digital identification to prove that they're over 18 or to have consent from a parent. Like, what are they going to do with that data? I mean, there have been data leaks in our state before, and they have not gone well. And the state is going to be collecting that information. And what are they going to do with that? I think that is a very valuable question that I have yet to hear asked of the sponsors of these bills. The Arkansas Times has reported on the anti-trans student name bill actually getting worse. You can read about that. We'll link it in our newsletter. The anti-trans bathroom bill passed. And, really, it's just one thing after another. But the good news is that in addition to 1601, that unconstitutional petition, permit bill being crushed, I don't know if crushed is the right word, but dying in House state agencies. Another bill died in House state agencies that we're happy to report on. It was a bill that Mary Bentley sponsored that would allow groups like municipal or county boards doing business to be able to meet in private. And so the FOI law in our state dictates that if more than two people are together and talking about business pertaining to what county board or quorum court or school board they serve on, that the public has a right to know what's going on, and that has to be a public meeting. And so Representative Bentley has been doing the hard work for those wacky people out in Conway who really hate FOI and they hate transparency. And
I mean, they don't even they'll turn people away from their meetings,
they're very secretive. They very much do not like public input. And again, these are elected leaders doing the work of that city and that county. And so it's a really problematic bill, and it would have basically given quorum courts and city boards and school board members the ability to just meet and discuss business on their own terms without public knowledge. And we are thankful that that bill failed. We are also pleased to say this like lovely Dolly Parton imagination library bill also passed in the Senate. In committee, and I think goes to the Senate floor, or maybe went today, and we're just late on that news. But we've had this program before, and this is just extending it by creating a mechanism by which the state can continue providing books to kids who don't have access to them to help improve literacy. Did anything else good happen? Or was it just three things?
Right now, that's all that I can remember. I will say this wasn't a good thing necessarily, but it was a fun thing. We got to see some discord in the house.
Yeah.
Not in like a committee, which is kind of where, I'm used to the House being like more put together, I think, than the Senate. I think when they get up to speak, they're more I know some of the senators will get up there and then go this way while they're speaking, and then 20 minutes later come back. But the House is normally more straightforward. But this particular bill, it's actually a bill that I agreed with. It's not one that I think we necessarily need to cover as an organization, but the bill itself, for example, in North Little Rock, pit bulls are banned. You cannot own a pit bull if you live in the city of North Little Rock, and they do that for what they say safety reasons. But this bill basically would prevent specific breed bans, and instead the wording would be dangerous animal or like dangerous dog. It works in the same way. It just you're not limiting for a breed. Holds up in court, all of that. We heard all of that. Anyway, the part where the discord came, apparently a lot of people in the House do not like pit bulls, and that's fine. But what is not fine is when Aaron Pilkington gets up to do his little spiel. And I don't know if y'all remember or watched, but he's one of those that is very graphic on some of his testimony, specifically abortion. Very graphic, very not trigger warning. I'm not gonna say what he said because I feel gross just thinking about what he said. But like very misleading in the actual operation of like how abortions work. Anyway, very graphic, very gross. He gets up to speak against this bill, talks about, like a very, it's a sad story. A family, I think it was 2 kids that ended up dying because of a pit bull attack. But he goes into that same rhetoric of just like really gross, like just being ripped apart, like literally is what it's so bad. Anyway, I don't think anyone could feel comfortable in that situation when you're listening to someone get that graphic, especially in like a state setting. But he does that for the shock effect, right? Like he does that to make you feel guilty if you do decide to vote for a bill. And he might really feel that way in his heart, but like he's not getting up there and making these graphic statements just because that's how he speaks normally. This is a tactic. And after everyone said their pieces, spoke for, spoke against, whatever have you, Representative Hawk, who is the one who ran this bill, he gets up and really calls Pilkington out. Says this is the same language that you use for abortion, and now you're comparing them to animals, like you're comparing them to dogs, which I thought was hilarious and like needed to be said. And that you kind of thought that it ended, the bill fails. Well, Hawk gets up again, like towards the end, and tries to, and this is something that they do a lot, but tries to expunge the vote just so that he can run it again, or maybe do like interim study, whatever the reason is. And Pilkington gets up to speak against the motion and is just like, well, I think we've had enough time on this. You called me out in your closing speech, so we don't need to hear it anymore. And that motion failed. So the bill and the motion failed. Anyway, fun times.
It's time for a legislative rewind. And I do want to warn everyone listening or watching that the next 2 clips are going to be kind of graphic. They're both of Aaron Pilkington, and these are some of the things that he said on the House floor. The first clip is in regard to abortion, and the second clip is in regard to dog attacks. So please don't watch or listen if either of those things are a trigger for you. But the final clip is of Representative Hawk calling Aaron Pilkington out for his really gross rhetoric.
So it's interesting, my colleague brings up invasiveness. You know what's really invasive? When you're a 8-month-old child in the womb and you're in Illinois and you're getting torn limb by limb out of your mother's womb because a company would rather pay for you to go across state lines than offer paid family leave. That's invasive. She was severely injured by these dogs when she tried to pull them off her 5-month-old boy, Hollis Dean, and 2-year-old girl, Lily Jane, just outside their home. In a matter of 10 minutes, a happy home went to one in which 2 small children were laying lifeless, covered in blood and bite marks, dead on the cold earth. As a father of a 2-year-old myself and a 6-month-old, I cannot imagine the pain and anguish that father must have felt holding the limp, pale bodies of his small children, realizing that he failed in his most basic duty as a father.
You've heard the most descriptive, gross testimony from Representative Pilkington. It's funny to me that Representative Pilkington got up here and gave a real solemn testimony about how they were going to rip limbs and throats. That sounded really familiar to his abortion testimony that he gave just last year, where he talked about how when a child was going to get ripped out of the womb. That sounded exactly the same. But yet he's going to do it on dogs.
The following day, Representative Hawk apologized at the beginning of the House floor for, saying that he shouldn't have attacked someone personally. And that was kind of interesting. He got like a standing ovation. I had missed the hubbub about the dog thing. And I saw some tweets that were like, when your representatives take longer to debate like a dog policy, but not the state's largest education policy, like something is out of whack. I thought that was really interesting. It's kind of what I've been thinking about since then. It's just, again, like what is the supermajority prioritizing? They're willing to like go to bat for their personal beliefs about dog breeds, but not about people.
Right. And this isn't like, I don't know, it's not a pertinent issue. Like you could probably pick out a handful of times where this is actually something that someone needs help with. Like a specific instance is like, I think they mentioned someone who had just gotten out of the military, had a pit bull, was like moving to North Little Rock, and then either had to, move, rehome their dog, or like euthanize their dog. And that's like a 1 in 100, like that's not, it doesn't happen often. So,
I have a question. I'm not going to weigh in on how I feel about this policy itself because I haven't actually fleshed it out. But did anyone ask about, like, again, this is overreach and this can be decided at the local level? Because like this varies from county to county and municipality, to your point, like North Little Rock.
That was also an issue. I think a couple of people raised that concern of just like, we need to let our municipalities deal with it, which like, again, like personal feelings with this bill, like, do I agree with it? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not 100% sure, especially when you start looking into the details of like, we do want to support local control. And I think the main point of this bill was just changing the phrasing.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. The other argument is that, 10, 20 years ago, the German Shepherd was the most dangerous dog, or like the Doberman. So it's one of those things where it's like, but again, why are we even talking about this? Like, why are we debating dog breeds right now? When we have like,
when Greg Letting said, I want to know whether or not this helps or hurts Arkansans, he wasn't talking about dogs. He was talking about people.
Yeah. So it's just like, I don't know, man. Again, like there's so many other issues, but we have this bill and it failed. So it's not like it did anything. We started a conversation. They spent 20-30 minutes on it, and had at least 10 more bills on the agenda. You know what I mean? So I kind of felt that way too at state agencies yesterday. When we, I know I turned it on at later and we're listening to Meek's debate about daylight savings time, which again, like may or may not agree with like what he's putting out there. But we had 6 or 7 election bills that had to run. So, it's that
This is my neither here nor there for this week. I recommend going to Representative Stephen Meeks's website. That's it. That's just the recommendation I'm going to give to our audience, and just to enjoy it, to go and to experience it as a user for everything it provides. Is there anything else, Hannah, or is that everything? Did you go to it?
No.
Oh, I was like, did you go to the website? And now you're like,
Not yet, Jenny.
I hope it's still active. There's like really fun widgets on his.
I'm gonna check it out anyway.
He's like a tech guy, I think. Like, isn't that his thing?
Yeah, he's like one of the people who worked to get or expand broadband, or that's like his claim.
Yeah. So I want people to have that frame of reference when they go to his website, is to know that he's the tech expert. Yeah. So next week is spring break for the Arkansas legislature, so they will not be in session. So a whole work week of no bad policies that are going to get passed. I think a couple things to keep an eye out. We've heard from the governor that we can expect criminal justice legislation to drop today, or I don't know if legislation will be filed next week, even though they're out. I don't know how that works, but we'll keep you posted if that happens. But we expect that to happen soon. We also expect a resolution to extend session to come soon, because there's no way they're going to get through these other two big priorities, prison expansion and tax cuts, before April 7th, which is the current sine die or into session date. Yeah. And if there is something that you think we should be covering, or a mistake that we've made, or a hot tip that you have, something corrupt happening in your community, whatever it is, please reach out. We have an open door policy. You can contact us via For Our People's website and On Our Watch. You can send a tip on Our Watch that way too, if you are aware of something that we need to shed light on. And as always, thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Hannah, parting words?
Enjoy next week, since we're not going to watch any committee meetings or floor sessions, which I'm very excited about. Spring break came right at the right time. Like, I think this week I was like a little slow to move. So I think we need a little.
I'm going camping. I'm going to the Diamond, the Crater State Park. And I'm going to find a diamond and blow this popsicle stand. No, that's not true. I'm staying.
I did that once, and I really, I was a kid, and so I really thought that I was gonna find a diamond. Like,
I am a grown woman, and I still think I'm gonna find a diamond.
I just remember, like, you take it up there and they like assess what it is, and they just kept being like, it's quartz.
They're like, that is a rock. But
yeah, and I'm like, can you check it again though? Are you sure? Anyway, have fun. That sounds like a good time. I'm gonna sleep.
Yes, you do that.
I will wake up, walk my dog, and go back to bed. Anyway, we'll be working, but not at the same level. We're not gonna be stuck to a screen, from 9 a.m. to whenever they decide to leave. I don't know. Happy week, happy weekend. Have a good next week, and that's all I have to say. So,
see y'all later.
Thank you for watching and/or listening to our weekly roundup of the 94th General Assembly here in Arkansas. Be sure to head over to our website, 4arpeople.org, to sign up for our weekly newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and listen to our brand new podcast. Once again, we are 4AR People, and we're here to keep you up to date on all things Arkansas legislature.